When Browns insiders start defending Shedeur Sanders, you know something in Cleveland has shifted. Because this wasn't just another bad game breakdown. This wasn't the usual routine where a rookie quarterback takes all the heat and everyone else quietly escapes blame. This time, two of the loudest voices around the Browns did something almost nobody expected. They flipped the script. Tony Rizzo, Tony Grossi, on the same page. And instead of piling on Shedeur Sanders, they went straight at everything around him. That alone should make you stop scrolling. Shedeur's stat line against the Bears didn't look good. 3 interceptions, constant pressure, drives starting deep in his own territory. And normally, that's where the conversation ends. Rookie quarterback struggles, learning curve, move on. But that's not what happened here. Instead, insiders openly admitted something fans have been saying all along. You can't fairly judge a rookie quarterback in this situation. Backup offensive line, poor field position, penalties killing drives before they start, coaching mistakes stacking up on top of each other. Special teams putting the offense in bad spots, game plans that didn't help anyone. And then came the moment that really turned heads. They didn't just defend Shadour. They questioned how Kevin Stefanski still has a job. That's not casual criticism. That's frustration boiling over. That's insiders saying out loud what usually stays between the lines. And once that door opens, the entire conversation changes. Because now, it's not about whether Shadour played a perfect game. It's about whether he had any real chance to play one. There's a big difference between making excuses and telling the truth. And what made this moment so striking wasn't emotion, it was how calm and matter-of-fact the defense of Shadour sounded. No spin, no hype, just context, which raises a bigger question. If even Browns insiders are saying it's impossible to judge this quarterback fairly, why is so much blame still landing on him? Because once you hear what they actually said and why they said it, this game stops looking like a rookie failure and starts looking like something much deeper going wrong in Cleveland. This is one of those games everyone thinks they understand, but very few actually watched closely. On paper, it looks simple. Shedeur Sanders, 3 interceptions, loss against the Bears, end of story. Except it wasn't that simple at all. From the very first quarter, the situation Shadour walked into was about as unforgiving as it gets for a rookie quarterback. Drives didn't start at midfield. They started pin deep, over and over again. Short fields for the defense, long fields for the offense, and immediate pressure to be perfect just to survive. That matters more than people want to admit. Because when a rookie quarterback is consistently backed up near his own goal line, the playbook shrinks fast. Defenses get aggressive, blitzes come quicker, safeties cheat forward, and suddenly, every throw carries more risk than usual. Not because the quarterback is reckless, but because the margin for error disappears. Add in the offensive line situation, and it gets even uglier. This wasn't Shadour operating behind a settled, healthy front. He was playing with a backup offensive line that struggled to hold up almost immediately. Pressure wasn't something that arrived late in the down. It was there before routes could even develop. That forces quick decisions, rushed mechanics, and throws made under duress. And yet, that context rarely makes it into the conversation. Instead, the focus stays locked on the interceptions, stripped of everything that led up to them. No mention of how often Shadour was running for his life. No mention of how frequently the offense was already behind the chains before the snap. No mention of how predictable things become when protection can't hold. That's how games get misread. Because when any quarterback, rookie or veteran, is put in that spot, the results usually look the same. Even Browns insiders admitted as much. Plug almost anyone under center in that situation, and the outcome doesn't magically improve. That doesn't mean Shadour played a flawless game. He didn't. There were throws he'd want back. Moments where throwing it away might have been the smarter move. But those moments didn't happen in a vacuum. They happened under constant pressure, with limited help and almost no room to breathe. And that's the part that gets lost. People remember the stat line. They forget the circumstances. Which is exactly why this game keeps getting used as evidence, even though it actually proves something very different. Because when you slow it down and look at what Shadour was dealing with, snap after snap, the question stops being, why did he struggle? The real question becomes, who wouldn't have? And once you start asking that, the conversation shifts fast, straight toward the people who put him in that position in the first place. This is where the conversation took a turn that almost nobody saw coming. Because when Tony Rizzo and Tony Grossi started talking about Shedeur Sanders, it didn't sound like the usual Cleveland media pile-on. In fact, it sounded like the opposite. And if you know their history, that alone should make you pause. Tony Grossi, in particular, has never been known for handing out easy passes. He's critical by nature, direct, often blunt. So when he flat out said this performance was no reflection of the quarterback, it landed differently. That wasn't spin, that wasn't sympathy, that was an insider drawing a hard line between failure and circumstance. And once that line was drawn, everything else followed. Instead of dissecting Shadour's mistakes in isolation, they zoomed out. They talked about how often the Browns were backed up inside their own territory, how drives started under pressure before the ball was even snapped, how a rookie quarterback was being asked to operate in the worst possible conditions. Early deficits, poor field position, and zero margin for error. Then came the part that really flipped the script. They didn't just defend Shadour. They started listing everything that went wrong around him. Penalties that killed drives, clock mismanagement, bad challenges, offensive and defensive game plans that didn't help anyone, special teams mistakes that set the offense up to fail before it even touched the ball. It was a checklist, and it was brutal. And the most telling part? None of it sounded emotional. It sounded resigned, like insiders who had seen this movie before and were tired of pretending it was about the quarterback. That's when the conversation crossed the line Cleveland media rarely crosses publicly. They questioned Kevin Stefanski, not subtly, not between the lines, out loud. How does he still have a job? How is a rookie quarterback supposed to be evaluated under these conditions? How do you separate talent from survival mode? Those aren't casual takes. Those are statements that suggest internal frustration has reached the surface. And that's why this moment matters. Because when insiders, who usually hold the quarterback accountable, start redirecting blame toward coaching and structure, it signals a shift, not in opinion, but in honesty. They weren't saying Shadour played perfectly. They weren't pretending the interceptions didn't happen. They were saying something far more important, that judging a rookie quarterback in this environment is pointless. And once respected voices say that out loud, the narrative changes. Because suddenly, the question isn't whether Shedeur Sanders struggled. It's whether anyone could have succeeded in his place. And that realization set the tone for everything that came next. Once Tony Rizzo and Tony Grossi started listing what actually went wrong in that game, it stopped sounding like a bad performance and started sounding like a breakdown at every level. They didn't argue, they didn't hesitate. They ran through it like a checklist, and every box was checked. Penalties? Yes, and not the harmless kind, the kind that start drives backed up, the kind that flip momentum before the offense even has a chance to breathe. For a rookie quarterback, that's already putting the game on hard mode. Clock mismanagement? Absolutely. Missed opportunities, poor situational awareness, decisions that didn't match the moment. That's not on the quarterback. That's on the sideline. Bad challenges? Yes, again. Burning opportunities when the team couldn't afford it. Losing control of flow. Giving the opponent free confidence. Then came the part that surprised even longtime listeners. They openly called out the game plan on both sides of the ball, offense and defense. Not just execution issues, but preparation issues, concepts that didn't help, adjustments that didn't come, a plan that failed to protect the one player who needed protection the most. And it didn't stop there. Special teams, missed assignments, poor field position, hidden yardage mistakes that don't show up in the box score but completely change a game's direction. Those are the details that quietly bury an offense, especially one led by a rookie. What made this moment so powerful wasn't any single criticism. It was the volume of them. When insiders rattle off that many coaching failures in one breath, they're telling you something without having to say it outright. This wasn't a player problem. It was a structure problem. And that's where the conversation became uncomfortable. Because if penalties, clock management, challenges, game planning, and special teams all failed, then what exactly was the quarterback supposed to overcome? That's the part people don't like confronting. Fans often want a clean answer. Either the quarterback is good or he isn't. But football doesn't work that way, especially not with rookies. When the foundation cracks, everything above it looks unstable. Grossi even said it plainly. It's impossible to judge a quarterback under these conditions. That's not a hot take. That's an admission. An admission that the Browns put their rookie in a position where survival was the goal, not success. And when survival mode becomes the standard, mistakes aren't shocking. They're inevitable. This checklist changed everything because it redirected responsibility. It forced the conversation away from 3 interceptions and toward a more honest question. If this many things went wrong before and after the snap, why is the quarterback the only one being judged? And once that question is asked out loud, the spotlight doesn't stay under center. It moves to the sideline, where the real decisions were being made. Once the conversation shifted away from Shedeur Sanders, there was only one place left for it to land: Kevin Stefanski. And this wasn't casual criticism or post-game frustration. This was insiders openly questioning leadership, something Cleveland media rarely does unless the situation has reached a breaking point. Tony Rizzo didn't dance around it. He flat out asked how Stefanski still has a job. That's not the kind of statement that comes out lightly, especially not from people who understand how cautious insiders usually are when it comes to head coaches. But the reasoning behind it was simple. If you can't evaluate your quarterback, then what exactly are you doing? That's the issue Stefanski walked straight into. A rookie quarterback playing behind a shaky offensive line, poor field position over and over again, penalties sabotaging drives before they start, game plans that don't protect the quarterback or simplify his reads, and no visible adjustment as things spiral. At some point, that stops being execution. It becomes coaching. And insiders made it clear, this wasn't one mistake. It was a pattern. Poor preparation, poor situational management, and a lack of structure that left the offense exposed from the opening drive. One of the most damning things said wasn't even about wins or losses. It was about evaluation. Grossi said it's impossible to judge any quarterback, rookie or not, under these conditions. That statement hits hard, because coaches are judged on many things, but one of the biggest is whether they put players in positions to succeed. And if the environment is so chaotic that evaluation becomes meaningless, that's a failure at the top. This is where Stefanski's situation becomes uncomfortable. It's not about one bad game. It's about repeated scenarios where the offense looks unprepared, disorganized, and reactive instead of proactive. It's about watching the same problems show up week after week with different players, which points away from personnel and toward leadership. And that's why the Heat landed where it did. Not because Stefanski lost a game, but because he lost control of the structure. They were questioning sustainability. How long can you keep blaming quarterbacks, receivers, or injuries when the same issues persist, regardless of who's on the field? That's the kind of conversation organizations hate having in public. But once it starts, it doesn't stop easily. Because if Shedeur Sanders can't be fairly judged in this system, then the system itself becomes the problem. And when that realization sets in, The focus isn't on the rookie anymore. It's on the coach who's responsible for everything around him. Once the conversation moved past coaching and structure, something important became clear. The people closest to the Browns weren't giving Shedeur Sanders a free pass, but they weren't burying him either. And that balance matters. Tony Rizzo and Tony Grossi didn't pretend the mistakes didn't happen. 3 interceptions are 3 interceptions. Missed opportunities were missed opportunities. They acknowledged that Shadour had plays he'd want back, moments where a check down or a throwaway might have been the safer option. But here's the difference between insiders and hot takes. They looked at how those mistakes happened. Shadour wasn't standing comfortably in the pocket scanning the field. He wasn't operating with clean protection and clear throwing lanes. He was running for his life. Forced to make decisions under immediate pressure. Forced to push the ball downfield because short options weren't developing or weren't there at all. That context changes everything. Insiders pointed out something casual fans often miss: effort. Shadour didn't shrink. He didn't play scared. He didn't shut it down once things went sideways. He kept competing, kept taking hits, kept trying to make plays in a game where the odds were stacked against him from the opening drive. That stood out. One insider even said Shadour looked like someone playing for a job, not someone overwhelmed by the moment. That's a telling observation, because quarterbacks who lose confidence stop pulling the trigger. They hesitate. They check out mentally. Shadour didn't do that. For better or worse, he stayed aggressive. And that aggression cuts both ways. Sometimes it leads to big-time throws, like the deep balls to Isaiah Bond, or the strike to Jerry Jeudy that insiders called one of his best passes in weeks. Other times, it leads to turnovers, when defenders are sitting on routes and pressure collapses timing. That's not recklessness. That's a rookie trying to survive in a broken environment. What insiders made clear is that this performance didn't lower Shadour's standing internally. If anything, it reinforced what they already believed, that judging him right now requires patience and honesty, not box score reactions. They weren't saying Shadour is flawless. They weren't saying he's the finished product. They were saying it's unfair to draw conclusions when the foundation around him is cracked. And that perspective is important, because when insiders start talking about a rookie quarterback in terms of toughness, competitiveness, and effort, even after a rough outing, it usually means the belief hasn't faded. It means they're still watching the process, not just the result. And that's a very different story than the one playing out in headlines. This is the part where a lot of conversations go wrong, because the moment context enters the discussion, people rush to label it as making excuses. And that's exactly what Tony Rizzo and Tony Grossi were careful not to do. They weren't saying Shedeur Sanders played a perfect game. They weren't pretending the interceptions didn't matter. They weren't rewriting what happened on the field. They were doing something much harder, explaining why the game unfolded the way it did. There's a big difference between excuses and context. Excuses erase responsibility. Context explains conditions. And what the insiders made clear is that Shadour was operating in survival mode almost immediately. When protection breaks down before routes develop, the quarterback's choices shrink. Throw it away sounds simple, but it assumes there's time to recognize the breakdown, reset, and safely get rid of the ball. In reality, that window often doesn't exist, especially for a rookie. Veteran quarterbacks have internal clocks built from years of reps. They know exactly how long they can wait. Rookies are still developing that feel. And when the offensive line collapses early, it forces decisions that look reckless on the stat sheet, but make sense in real time. That's not an excuse. That's football reality. Insiders also pointed out that Shadour wasn't playing loose because the game was out of reach. He was still competing, still trying to push the ball, still trying to create something positive when the offense had almost nothing going for it. That effort matters, because quarterbacks who are overwhelmed don't keep firing. They fold. They start protecting themselves instead of the team. Shadour didn't do that. He kept trying to make plays, even when the structure around him gave him very few good options. And yes, sometimes the smarter play is the check down. Sometimes it is throwing it away, but those decisions are learned through repetition in stable environments, not chaos. Expecting flawless decision-making from a rookie in that setting isn't realistic. It's unfair. That's the line insiders were drawing. They weren't absolving Shadour of mistakes. They were rejecting the idea that those mistakes define him. Because judging a quarterback without acknowledging protection, field position, penalties, and game planning doesn't lead to truth. It leads to lazy conclusions. And that's why this conversation mattered so much. Not because it defended Shedeur Sanders blindly, but because it reminded people that development doesn't happen in a vacuum. If you want clean results, you need a clean environment. And until that exists in Cleveland, the smartest thing anyone can do is separate excuses from reality and stop pretending they're the same thing. When Browns insiders start defending a rookie quarterback instead of questioning him, that's not noise, that's a signal. Because Tony Rizzo and Tony Grossi didn't have to say what they said. They could have gone the easy route, blame the interceptions, shrug it off as rookie struggles, move on to the next headline. That's usually how this goes. But they didn't. Instead, they slowed the conversation down and pointed the spotlight somewhere Cleveland fans haven't been allowed to look for a while. The environment itself, the coaching, the structure, the conditions being handed to a young quarterback and then used to judge him. And that's when things changed. They weren't asking fans to ignore the mistakes. They were pretending Shedeur Sanders is finished developing. They were asking a more uncomfortable question. How do you evaluate a quarterback when almost everything around him is failing at the same time? Because once that question is asked, the stat line loses power. 3 interceptions stop being a verdict and start becoming a symptom. A rookie struggling stops being an individual flaw and starts looking like a byproduct of survival football. Bad field position, constant pressure, penalties stacking up, and game plans that don't protect the most important position on the field. That's why this moment matters. When insiders, people who protect the organization by default, start saying it's impossible to judge the quarterback fairly, they're not defending a player. They're exposing a process that isn't working. And that should worry everyone more than one rough game ever could. Because quarterbacks don't fail in isolation. They fail when teams confuse toughness with development, chaos with opportunity, and pressure with growth. Throwing a rookie into dysfunction and demanding clean results doesn't build stars. It burns timelines. Shedeur Sanders didn't walk out of that Bears game looking perfect, but he also didn't walk out looking broken. He competed, he took hits, he made throws, he stayed aggressive. And that's exactly why insiders paid attention to how he played, not just what the box score said. So when respected voices stop blaming the rookie and start questioning the system, fans should do the same. Not because it guarantees Shadour is the future, not because criticism isn't fair, but because fair evaluation matters. And if Cleveland truly wants answers at quarterback, the first step isn't asking whether Shedeur Sanders is good enough. It's asking whether the Browns are giving any quarterback a real chance to show it. Because when insiders defend the rookie, it usually means the real problem isn't under center.